controversial U.S.-Russia peace plan for Ukraine faces strong congressional pushback. What are the points? Foreign fighters and components fuel Russia's war on Ukraine, while Germany plans long-range weapons and Czechs fund FLAMINGO missile for Ukraine in 48 hours. World's Children's Day. How Ukrainian children are losing their childhood. The United States and Russia have reportedly drafted a peace plan for Ukraine, one that reads more like a wish list of the Kremlin's most maximalist demands. According to Financial Times sources, the proposal includes Ukraine giving up parts of its territory, scrapping certain types of weapons, and drastically reducing the size of its armed forces. The document, crafted by a group of current and former U.S. and Russian officials, is still described as a broad concept. But even at this early stage, the ideas inside are raising eyebrows. One key element calls for halting U.S. military aid to Ukraine altogether, a move that would leave the country dangerously exposed if Russia decides to strike again. The plan also ventures deep into Ukraine's internal affairs. It reportedly suggests granting official status to the Moscow-linked Ukrainian Orthodox Church and making Russian an official state language. People familiar with the discussions describe the proposal as extremely comfortable for Vladimir Putin. Unnamed Ukrainian officials who spoke to Financial Times said that in its current form, the plan is completely unacceptable unless it undergoes major fundamental changes. An unnamed U.S. official told NBC that Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner were all involved in shaping the proposal. According to the outlet, the plan was developed in consultations with Ukrainian representatives, as well as Kremlin-linked envoy Kirill Dmitriev. NBC News also reports that the U.S. President Donald Trump has approved a 28-point peace plan. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has begun sketching out the mindset behind Washington's push. In a post on X, he argued that achieving peace in Russia's war against Ukraine would require concessions from both sides. He said real progress would require a broad exchange of serious and realistic ideas, adding that the U.S. is assembling a list of potential proposals for ending the war, built, he claimed, from input provided by both Kyiv and Moscow. Yet all of this seems to clash sharply with the mood in Congress, where, especially among Republicans, support for Ukraine has grown, according to CNN polls. Lawmakers from both parties in Washington have expressed strong criticism and deep skepticism toward the leaked 28-point peace plan. Republican Joe Wilson called the plan pure speculation and warned that giving up territory would be a reward for aggression, drawing parallels to the appeasement of the 1930s. He also said that banning foreign troops from Ukraine could leave the country exposed to further Russian attacks. Republican Don Bacon noted that Congress hasn't seen an official version of the plan. Still, he said reports about cutting Ukraine's army or ending foreign military aid would amount to capitulation, and promised to fight such measures with full force. Democrat Herb Conaway stressed that any peace deal must include Ukraine's participation. Across party lines, U.S. lawmakers agree on one thing: any agreement that leaves Ukraine vulnerable to renewed Russian aggression is unlikely to gain congressional support. Meanwhile, within the Trump administration, support for Ukraine appears to be waning. Reuters reports that Kellogg will step down as Trump's special envoy to Ukraine in January. The decision is reportedly linked to frustration over being overextended, as well as a belief that some administration officials have not been forceful enough in applying pressure on Russia. And more about the situation on the front. Over the past 24 hours, 193 combat clashes occurred. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the situation remains tense in the Pokrovsk direction. There, the defense forces repelled more than 50 attacks by Russian troops. Another 25 Russian assaults were stopped by Ukrainian servicemen in the Kostiantynivka direction. In the Lyman direction, Ukrainian defenders managed to repel 17 attempts by the Russian army to break through the defense. The defense forces are attempting to disrupt the logistical routes of Russian troops. This was written on Facebook by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky. He again visited the Pokrovsk direction. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the defense forces continue to carry out operations in the Pokrovsk-Mirnorad agglomeration. In particular, they are working on strengthening their own logistics while simultaneously trying to disrupt the logistical routes of the Russian occupiers.
We are working to ensure the resilience of our logistics and are taking measures to disrupt the enemy's logistical routes. The occupiers are detected and destroyed both during attempts to move and in identified concentration areas. In just the past 24 hours, total losses of the occupiers in the Pokrovsk direction amounted to 487 personnel, of which 350 were irrecoverable. The exchange fund is being replenished with captured Russian servicemen. Alexander Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Facebook.
The strengthening of air defense was discussed by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrskyi, during a meeting with an American delegation led by U.S. Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll. According to Syrskyi, strikes carried out under the Deep Strike program have demonstrated effectiveness in disrupting Russian logistics and are yielding positive results in neutralizing Russia's military potential.
I once again emphasized that strengthening the protection of Ukraine's skies, increasing our long-range strikes on enemy military targets, and maintaining and stabilizing the front line must undermine the enemy's offensive capabilities and ultimately force it into a just peace. In particular, strikes carried out within the Deep Strike framework have already demonstrated their effectiveness in disrupting Russian logistics and have produced positive results in neutralizing the military potential of the Russian Federation. Operations against oil refineries are intended to reduce the war to bleak prospects for Moscow, thereby making it unprofitable for the enemy. Alexander Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Facebook.
Driscoll will report on the results of the talks to Trump. After Kiev, the minister will go to Moscow for a meeting with Russian officials. According to sources, Driscoll was involved in the negotiations because the White House believes that the Kremlin may be more willing to engage in dialogue if the intermediaries are military personnel. Russia is actively recruiting foreigners to participate in the war against Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War, at least 18,000 people from 128 countries and unrecognized territories have fought or continue to fight as part of the Russian armed forces. Nearly 3,500 of them have already died. It is worth noting that Russia has created an extensive network of recruiters worldwide in an attempt to compensate for the enormous losses of its army. It's important to remember that missiles with foreign components are still killing Ukrainians. Yesterday, Russian Kh-101 cruise missiles hit residential apartment buildings in Ternopil. Verified reports, shared multiple times with international partners, show that the Kh-101 contains components and parts produced by companies in the U.S., China, and Taiwan, Germany, the Netherlands, and other countries. On top of that, this wasn't some old stockpile. A missile was freshly made, with fragments identified as being produced in the fourth quarter of 2025. But Germany is doing everything possible to equip the Ukrainian armed forces with long-range missile systems and to organize joint production on Ukrainian territory. This was stated by Chancellor Friedrich Merz at a press conference with Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson. In addition, the German leader emphasized that Berlin and Stockholm are expanding their strategic partnership, covering areas such as defense, security policy, and assistance to Ukraine.
We have been working intensively with the Ukrainian government for several months now on implementing long-range weapons projects. The Ukrainian army is being equipped with such systems. We agreed not to discuss the details publicly, as we believe the Russian side should not be informed about the extent of our military support. I can only say that we are doing everything possible to provide the Ukrainian army with weapons systems that have the necessary range, and the number of these systems will increase in the coming weeks and months, if needed, up to and including the production of such weapons directly in Ukraine.
a gift for Putin. In 48 hours, the Czechs raised 12.5 million crowns for a Flamingo missile. Volunteers had expected the fundraising to take a week. Organizer Martin Ondracek admitted that this was a record and hinted that this might not be the last surprise. They are now preparing for new negotiations with the rocket's manufacturer, Firepoint, suggesting that the gift set could expand. The missile will be named Dana-1, in honor of Czech nuclear physicist and head of the State Office for Nuclear Safety, Dana Drbova, known for her support of Ukraine. Once manufactured, the weapon will be delivered to the armed forces of Ukraine. Volunteering instead of childhood. Instead of toys in school, many Ukrainian children are spending their days helping others. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, over 700 young Ukrainians have become direct victims of Russian aggression, and tens of thousands have been forcibly removed from their homes under the guise of evacuation. In reality, they were kidnapped. Ukrainian children are losing their childhood. Yet many are stepping up through volunteer work. On the World Children's Day, our next story focuses on kids from the Kharkiv region and how they are supporting the front line.
Alexander is 14 years old and lives in Derhachi, a frontline town just 25 kilometers from the Russian border. In November 2022, his class teacher suggested the students join local volunteers in weaving camouflage nets for the Ukrainian armed forces. Alexander was one of the first to sign up. For the past 3 years, he has been cutting, sorting, and packing fabric strips used to conceal military positions and equipment.
The piece of fabric is about 1 meter long. We fold it in half, then in half again. We cut from the end here and from the beginning there. Then we fold it once more and cut it into 4 strips. This material is for making kikimora ghillie suits.
Alexander's mother, Olena, works alongside her son and spends all her free time weaving nets. In the early days of 2022, when they were still cutting up donated bed sheets and duvet covers by hand, both mother and son ended up with blisters on their fingers. Today, they use special camouflage fabric, and Ukrainian army units from all over the country are now queuing for the nets they produce. Olena says her son's childhood has been anything but calm and safe, yet he is determined to keep helping the army.
They've spent their whole childhood like this. They can't play with friends or even meet up safely. Sometimes I'm afraid to let them go outside because in Derhachi, something is always flying overhead. Cluster bombs, Shahed drones, or something else. At their age, they should be out playing all day.
Our soldiers are serving in unbearable conditions and putting in titanic efforts, risking their lives every day in the trenches on the front line. That's why it is the conscious duty of every Ukrainian to help the army however they can.
Even 3 years after Russia's full-scale invasion began, spent shell casings can still be found on the streets of Slatini in the Derhachi district. The village is still under regular Russian bombardment. This is where the Pishchulina family lives, mother Alona and her children Matvey and Ulyana. Alona trained as an artist, and in 2023 she decided to turn a spent shell casing into an art object for the first time.
Deep down, there's still a child inside every one of us. Maybe because I'm always with my own children, that child in me remains very naive. I keep hoping everything will turn out all right because it's still hard to believe such horror is actually happening.
Over the course of the full-scale war, Matvey, Ulyana, and their mother have painted dozens of missile and aerial bomb casings, helmets, ammunition boxes, and even a piece of tank armor.
Чесно сказати, я не те, щоб дуже знаю.
To be honest, I don't fully know how to explain it, but I understand that these objects, the casings, the helmets, the boxes, have become symbols of what is happening right now. By painting them, we're reminding people that we must not forget. The war is still going on, and we all have to do something about it.
The children paint directly onto the metal so the finished pieces can be sold at charity auctions. Every hryvnia raised goes to support Ukraine's soldiers.
Why did you take 2 shades of blue?
To finish the flowers, Dave.
And the yellow?
For the centers.
So you're painting yellow and blue flowers?
Yes.
Russia's war against Ukraine has robbed Matvey, Ulyana, Alexander, and millions of other Ukrainian children of a peaceful and safe childhood. As of now, more than 1.5 million children under the age of 18 are living on territories temporarily occupied by Russia and remain at risk of forced deportation. Approximately 20,000 Ukrainian children have already been forcibly taken to the Russian Federation or to occupied territories. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, more than 700 children have been killed and at least 2,285 wounded in Ukraine. Reported by Natalia Bielokudria, Andriy Domovoy, from Kharkiv region, UATV News.
That's all for now. Stay with us and subscribe so you don't miss the next updates. See you in the upcoming episodes.